Welcome to Ask AI, the podcast that brings you insightful interviews and news from the world of Canadian artificial intelligence. This episode is sponsored by Microsoft Canada. Microsoft is committed to building trusted and responsible AI systems. To learn more, go to microsoft.com/AI and check out their free AI business school to start building intelligence into your solutions today. We're also sponsored by Cinchi, the global leader in data fabric technology. Visit cinchi.com to learn how to eliminate integration and turbocharge your AI transformation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jackson Kahn, and I'm the host of the Ask AI podcast. Thanks so much for joining us on our latest episode. At Ask AI, we want to hear your questions about artificial intelligence. So we'll do our best to get expert replies to your queries and feature them on a future episode or in our newsletter. We also want to share news with you about our upcoming projects and activities, as well as any upcoming projects and activities that you may have. Just send an email with your question or your announcement to info@askai.org. Today, we're so excited to be joined by Melissa Kargiannakis, who is the award-winning founder and CEO of Skritswap. Skritswap is a startup that swaps complex jargon into plain, easy-to-understand language. Melissa won the top 100 most powerful women in Canada award. She's also won awards from the Queen of England and the Women of Influence, which was from RBC, the Canadian Women Entrepreneur Awards. She led Skritswap to win the top 20 most innovative companies in Canada award. Melissa has also published master's research in the #1 medical informatics journal, the Journal for Medical Internet Research. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Jackson, it's exciting to be here. Always enjoy chatting with you.
Awesome. Well, Melissa, we actually met back in our days at Western. I thought we'd start off there and ask sort of generally, what was your path into AI? And was that something that started for you in university?
Certainly not. I definitely, as a sciences undergrad and then health informatics sciences master's student, did not think that I would end up working in artificial intelligence. It definitely happened serendipitously. Where it was influenced by my studies was in my master's in February 2013, sitting in a class talking about this health journal article and the newspaper article about it and how they weren't really saying the same thing. And then I just had a light bulb eureka moment of, wait a sec, can't we use artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and all these advances in machine learning to essentially translate from complicated to clear within the same language?
I think that is so fantastic. What I'm really thinking about a lot these days is all these underrated, I would honestly call them, or it seems like things that it's like, why doesn't that exist already? Mm-hmm. I was blown away. I think I read a stat the other day, and you probably know this way better than me, but it was some stat about like how many folks are either actually illiterate or have a very low literacy rate just in North America. And I was blown away by that.
Yeah, the low literacy rate in Canada is 48%, and in the United States is 47%. And low literate means you can read, right? Because it's not about illiteracy. It's so much worse because you can read when you're low literate, but you're probably having reading skills that capped out at about a grade 5 reading level. And most communications you need to do anything in the world, rent a house, lease a car, buy a house, anything, are written at best a grade 9, 10 reading level, usually much, much higher in legalese.
And I would imagine, and I think you could probably speak to this from your health and public health background as well, but particularly now in the age of, coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic, having accessible information is more important than ever. Literally, there's life and death consequences.
Absolutely. I tweeted about this morning because people were frustrated by the LA news updates and someone tweeted, I still can't figure out if I can go for a run outside. And I've read this 3 times. And I know we have the same problems in Alberta and Ontario.
Yeah. And I know there's been so many conversations about how, we'll hear one thing one day, and it could even be from a public health office. And then you hear something else in shorthand from a government official. But maybe something will be lost in translation, or something will be lost in trying to make something accessible. But I think, and I have empathy for people who are trying to do this, but, in trying to make something simple, I think sometimes in a crisis situation, people can miss the mark. Mm-hmm. And it's not always reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, simplifying information is such a complicated field that I only know of 300 experts in the entire world. And we've communicated with 168 of them, most of whom work with us and help train our machine. And they're very specialized, the skill set they have to understand how to make something really complicated, really clear in a way that doesn't lose that value. It is a very specialized skill.
Well, and it's so much so that they literally named a field after, right? I believe it's knowledge translation.
Yep. Knowledge translation and plain language are the two fields. That's right.
Gotcha. And what I'm wondering is, just to kick us off a bit more at a high level, could you talk a bit more about Skritswap, some of the work you're doing and what's up?
Absolutely. Skritswap has this mission of simplifying anything, anywhere, because what I felt very passionate about is, sure, a lot of big companies are giving access to the internet and people can get online and can search literally anything. But if they cannot understand the information when they get there, so what? And that has always been a driver for me. And with Skritswap, we are a couple years in now, very exciting. We have raised multiple rounds of venture capital from the Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, as well as with Canadian investors. We have worked with large customers like big banks, insurance companies, and some of the top consulting firms in the world, with customers both in Canada, the States, and a few in Europe as well. We have built a tool that works in Microsoft Word. You can take complicated information. So say you're in Microsoft Word, you can just highlight a paragraph and hit Skritswap to say, hey, swap this. And in just a few seconds, it can do a pretty good job of simplifying information. And it's not just about changing words, it's also about changing sentence structure, creating bulleted lists, all those things. And then the last two things I'm really proud of with the company and where we've come is we have filed multiple patents, both in Canada and the United States. And one of those patents covers our new clarity score, because all historic ways of measuring readability just look at syllables per word and words per sentence, et cetera, which would make the word refrigerator and television considered complicated, even though they're very well known. So we've completely flipped the paradigm on that, which is super exciting. And the second thing is I've built a team that lives by my values. So we are 80% women, 40% other underrepresented groups based on race, and we span 5 generations. So when you think of startups, these young 20-somethings, et cetera, we actually span 5 generations, right, from our 20s up to 70s.
Yeah, really interesting to hear sort of about how you model the company based on your own values. I can't help but just think so much about the imperative of this. And I'm wondering sort of what's been the reception more broadly in the market? Like, have you sort of what sort of avenues are opening up for you and for the company uniquely?
One of the unique avenues where we've seen great interest and uptake is actually in contracts management. Have you ever heard of the field of contracts management?
Are you talking about like RFP processes or like managing? No, you know what? I'm just going to say no, because I feel like maybe I've heard that at a high level, but I don't want to disabuse my own general knowledge.
Yeah, I would say pretty close. So some of it is about managing RFPs, depending on the size of the company. It's all the people who manage not just the signing of contracts, but also often managing the fulfillment, especially when you're looking in the aerospace and defense industry. Some of the folks I've talked to there, it's a lot about the management because they last for years and years and years and multi-million-dollar deals. So it's not just about signing, but also about executing on them. So that's what a contracts manager does. And that's been an area that opened up for us towards the end of 2019 when I had one of the keynote slots and other track speaking slots at their North American conference in Phoenix, one of the last times we were all in person. And so contracts managers have seen a huge need because they negotiate these deals. They're hired, fired, and promoted based on how fast they can get deals done. And they can accelerate deals by 50 to 60%. They can shorten that sales cycle by 50 to 60% when they have simplified the contracts.
That is so interesting. And perhaps we need to look into the solution as well. That's incredible. Oh my gosh. I guess this is ultimately around procurement as well. So accelerating procurement.
Yep. So procurement's one side.
Okay.
If you think of a contracts manager, they're either on the buy side, procurement, or the sell side. We focus on the sell side because companies care very much, especially now, about their bottom line. Fundamentally.
And I wonder too, like, has that primarily been sort of in between businesses, like on the B2B side, or is it also between businesses and institutions or even governments?
It's largely business to business. So even deals that major companies are doing with other major companies, people are like, oh, well, everyone knows the lingo. It's like, yeah, but everyone's busy. And so if you can write something more clearly, then they can read through your contract faster and they're much more likely to sign yours over the other one that, yes, they understand, but is complicated and cumbersome to get through, even though, yes, they understand it.
I think that's such a great prompt for business decision makers everywhere, maybe particularly, to that role, but it's, do I need to include a glossary, let alone potentially a dictionary with this contract? that I'm offering.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to reinvent contracts to simplify them, save time, save money, and everyone is much clearer on what is or isn't part of the limitations of liability or what is in the warranty section, et cetera.
Huge value. And I even imagine, like, I know it sounds like, the strong business applications. I believe there's also some strong consumer applications you even mentioned, sort of like with a Word plugin, for example. Is that something that you've potentially looked at, like simplifying, let's say like legal? I don't know, I'm imagining the situations, or like even for consumers, like if they're trying to understand a contract that they're signing, even for example, with a bank or with a firm, anything that they might encounter in their own lives?
Absolutely. That's an area where we'd love to get into down the line. We're starting business to business because they got the big bucks to pay, and starting with contracts managers, and then looking at consumers. Probably divorce would be a starting area because it's a very high stakes environment with a lot of legalese. And then potentially employment agreements would be where we would look to start in the consumer space.
Super exciting for me personally as well, as someone who was hiring a lawyer for lots of money to look at it, prior employment agreements. Melissa, I know before the call, you also mentioned that you have an exciting opportunity with a new sort of advance in AI, which is GPT-3. Wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that, and also maybe just give the audience a bit more info on that in general.
GPT-3, for those who don't know what it is built by a company called OpenAI. OpenAI is heavily invested in and run by Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Sam Altman used to run one of the most, if not the most famous accelerator in the world based out of Silicon Valley called Y Combinator. So between Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and a very large team, OpenAI has scraped the entire internet, and from that created a next word guesser. So the simplest way to explain it is GPT-3 will just guess the next word based on the previous words in a sentence or in a paragraph, based on all these probabilities that it's calculated from reading the entire internet. For an example of the scale of this, our company, Skritswap, we have scraped across Wikipedia twice. And even just one time over Wikipedia is 776 million words, whereas they did the entire internet. Now, this poses some interesting opportunities as much as challenges. One of them is that, unfortunately, it also means they're grabbing a lot of sexist, racist, ableist, misogynistic, like horrific material that's just out on the web. And so, unfortunately, the algorithms have not been fine-tuned. It's just pulling from everything. So that's one of the challenges when you just take in everything. And one of the interesting realities is because of who runs it, they were able to spend a speculated $25 to $30 million just to build this word predictor.
Wow. That's wild. And so potentially if I'm inferencing right, like you have a massive opportunity to displace that type of duplicative rebuilding of the same system?
Well, we don't have $20 or $30 million yet.
Yeah, fair enough, but it's coming, right?
Absolutely, it's coming. It's a different way of looking at it. So we're taking a much more specialized and thoughtful approach. And we were among the first, 500 to 700 people in the world to have access to GPT-3.
So cool.
There are now 3,500 people as of last week that I know have access to it. And so we were among the first of the first. And when we were playing with it this summer, one of the interesting things that came up is GPT-3 is amazing at taking a really simple sentence and writing it in legalese. Mm-hmm. Like it'll add all the legal mumbo jumbo and legal jargon. It's hilarious, but it has a really hard time going the other way.
Really?
And that's what we specialize on. So it's a great opportunity.
And just at a high level, could you illuminate a little bit more about that? Why is it harder to kind of reverse that process to take something from complex to simple?
Well, it's always easier to add color and add information and throw things in that seems logical. That's all that GPT-3 does. If I wrote a sentence and I fed half of it to GPT-3, it probably would never write the exact half that I wrote, but it would write a second half that makes logical sense. Mm-hmm. And it can add different things, whether that's adjectives or additional information that it's pulled from all over the internet. Say I'm writing about financial information, it might throw in an extra sentence with something else it read about financial information. But the challenge of preserving the integrity and the core message of the sentence and what it's trying to say while stripping away anything that's excess and, to use an unfortunately large word, superfluous, is so ridiculously difficult because if you take out one wrong word, you could change the whole meaning. So you really have to be careful.
That's so interesting. I'm guessing out of all this, you're having the chance to develop some pretty strong proprietary tech. Was that something that you've patented already?
Yes. So we have filed multiple patents in the US and in Canada. And a lot of Canadian companies do not invest in their IP strategy early. We did this right away as a small pre-seed company. And our backdated provisionals on these full patents that are now filed go all the way back to early 2019. And you have to write them all through 2018 just to get that February 2019 file date. And I really hope that more Canadians can continue to invest in patent portfolios because it does make a difference, especially when you're raising money stateside. And people say, oh, what are you really going to litigate it? But it's so much more than that. It's a protected way to publicly display what you've built. And that's really cool because you share the full technical information in the patents, but it is protected. It's a really great mechanism for sharing what you've done.
That's fantastic. And is there any, I guess what I'm wondering too is in terms of an output from Skritswap, would you get, I know at a very basic level, like I've run on Word in the past, I've run their reading score, for example, will tell you how easy something is to read. If you develop something that is proprietary, like a much more accurate or precise measure of that?
Thank you for asking. Yes. So our new Clarity score, which we're very excited about, and it is included in one of our patents, which you can see live now, both on the Canada patents site and on the USPTO. So we've developed a whole new content clarity score. And the reason we call it a clarity score instead of a readability score is that clarity is all about understanding and understandability and legibility. Can you read it? Can you sound out the words and read them? But clarity is all about intelligibility. Is it understandable? Is it clear? And readability just doesn't hit the mark there. And we've talked about a little bit earlier, I briefly mentioned readability scores only say words per sentence, syllables per word, sentences per paragraph, which is only a small component. And frankly, all the experts are saying an incredibly outdated way of measuring readability. So instead, we've taken into account all sorts of things ranging from style and spacing and bullets and headings, as well as commonality of words. So using some of what we've scraped from Wikipedia, what is a common word? If it's television and refrigerator that we know are common, it doesn't matter that there are a lot of syllables because they should bring your score down because they're a commonly known and commonly used word. So that's the new clarity score we've built. It is live on our website. So if you want to test the clarity of your content, just head over to skritswap.com/readability-clarity, and you can see how your writing stacks up.
I think I've got to go take a look at my own writing and potentially take myself out of my job if I'm not doing too well. So let's see how much clarity I've got. Also reminds me of that great Zed song. You are my clarity. It's a great song, but I'll never sing on the podcast again. Also wondering, Melissa, to create all of these awesome things and, register these new patents, I'm assuming that there is a massive amount of data behind it, not just sort of through external data sets like GPT-3, but ones that are in your ownership. Are you able to share any or give any light on what you may have there?
Yes, and I will tiptoe very carefully through this part of the conversation.
All righty.
So what I can say is we have multiple data sets that we've been building. Some of them are right at the word level. How do you determine simpler words? Some of them are at the sentence level. Some of them are at the paragraph level. And of course, we have full contracts and full documents where we have the entire document that's complicated and the entire mirror image that's much clearer that has been validated by our customers. One of the data sets we're most proud of is a sentence corpus, which is a lot of jargon for we have a whole bunch of sentences that we've pulled from contracts that are publicly available through the US Security Commission EDGAR website, which is basically they took any public filing of any contract for a publicly traded company that legally has to be publicly filed and turned it into a data set for companies like mine to train on. And by pulling those complicated sentence originals, we had humans this summer where we created jobs for over 16 different folks, including predominantly Canadians. And these plain language experts were tagging each of the sentences to help the machine understand it better for something called word sense disambiguation. And to our knowledge, of course, Google might have bigger ones we don't know about, but to our knowledge, we have the largest human tagged sentence corpus in the world.
That is super, super exciting to be able to say. I'm sure who would be most proud? Gutenberg? That's awesome. How do you feel about that?
It feels amazing. It was definitely an investment. It took time, money, people power, but especially at a time when people needed jobs the most, it was a win-win-win. And it feels really, really cool.
Seriously. Well, you guys should be very proud. That is just awesome. And Melissa, I know you've also got so much going on outside of the company. I know a lot of it's related to the work that you do, but wanted to give you a chance to talk about that. Did a bit of research on your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that you're the vice chair of the Technical Committee on Plain Language for Accessibility Standards Canada. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I'd love to. It's a very exciting new committee. We just kicked off in September, October. And what happened was Accessibility Standards Canada, as you know, there's lots of accessibility legislation in Canada and in Ontario with AODA. And Accessibility Standards Canada identified 4 major priority areas where they needed more information and felt that by focusing on these 4 major priority areas, they could better help and enable Canadians to have a more accessible world. And one of those areas in the top 4 of all the many areas for accessibility, one was plain language, which makes me super excited. And especially when you look at other countries like the United States, where they have the 2010 Plain Writing Act, and we don't really have that equivalent in Canada, it's extremely exciting to be a part of this federal committee to determine how federal and government agencies will write in plain language going forward and provide a standard that other private businesses can look to the government and follow as well. And this is happening on the backdrop of ISO international standards for plain language being created for the first time. And those will soon to be released. And it's amazing to see Canada getting involved in plain language as well.
That's so exciting. And I saw another one is you're also on the board for the Center for Plain Language. I believe it for a group in DC.
That's right. I've been on the board of directors for the Center for Plain Language in 2018. And what's fascinating there is I'm one of the youngest people on.
That's so cool.
There are some
That's
younger
awesome.
folks now, but certainly at the time when I was elected, one of the youngest folks, and also running a very high-tech startup compared to a lot of government workers, academics, and small consultancy shops. It brings a totally different perspective that I think is so critical and so important. And I will announce, if I can, that I also joined the Royal Commonwealth Society Literacy Working Group as the lead for the Americas and Canada. And that's related to when I had won the award from the Queen. So that's how I ended up getting involved in some of this Commonwealth work. And so very exciting to be a part of those 3 entities, one in Canada, one in the US, and one for the Commonwealth, all related to literacy, which is exactly part of our mission at Skritswap.
Amazing. Anything else, Austin, we should know about?
I'm going to sing opera.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Just whenever you find time for that, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I mean, if I can encourage folks to join boards, I knew in undergrad that if I wanted to be a successful business person, then I would absolutely need to be involved, not just in being an operator, but also sitting on boards. That's a very critical component of being a successful business leader, is advising other companies and holding them accountable. And I started sitting on boards in undergrad at Western when I was 21, 22. And it's great to have that, 8 years plus background now. And that started through a program at the United Way, where they enable young folks to be an ex officio observer member on boards. And I started with neighborhood legal services in London, Ontario, which was an amazing way to begin exposing myself to boards. And I really encourage everyone to start as young as you can, even just in observer seats, because then when you have that background, you can start moving up to actually being elected to board of directors, being vice chairs, being the chair someday, things like that. And especially for women and underrepresented groups, we need your voice in those boardrooms. It's imperative. So start young, build that track record, and say, hey, I've been doing this for a while.
Some pretty amazing call to actions from Melissa to all of our audience. And I would give a shout out to, I think, a couple organizations. One of the particulars, I believe the Girls on Boards program, which I think is run through the Girls 20. Are you familiar with that, Melissa?
No.
I think I've met some folks who are part of it. I think there's another one too with Civic Action, based out of the GTA.
Yes.
Which is supposed to be pretty fantastic. So just in case folks need any resources to get started there. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been awesome. Like honestly, nonstop. There's so many great things to hear about Skritswap, so many impressive initiatives that you're involved in. You definitely deserve this recognition that you've been given. It's amazing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It feels surreal sometimes.
That's awesome. Any last plugs or anything people should look at before we jump off?
Shameless plug. I'd love to simplify your documents, your contracts, whatever it is you need simplified. Head on over to Skritswap and we can simplify that for you.
Sounds awesome. I think I'm going to have to do that as well for my entire life. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us again. To all of our listeners, thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Ask AI podcast. You can find this, and if you're not already subscribed, you can make sure you're doing that on iTunes or Spotify. We're looking forward to the future, and if you're listening to this a little bit closer to the holidays, please have a happy holiday. Melissa, thank you again so much.
Thanks, Jackson. Great chatting.
Thanks for listening to the Ask AI podcast. The executive producer was Chris McClellan. Additional production support was provided by Olena Mack and Kristen Riddell. To learn more about our webinar and chatbot projects and get information about sponsorships and volunteering, please visit our website at askai.org or email info@askai.org. Listeners can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just search Ask AI.